Well, I was born in Woodburn, Oregon, and lived there a good share of my young adult life. Uh, Went to school there, went to the University of Oregon, was in business in Woodburn for a good many years, was elected to the position of representative, representing the District of Marion County. That was in 1956 election, so my first session was in 1957. I served the 57, 1959, 1961, 1963 sessions as a representative. Well, I never really wanted to run for the legislature. It's rather a strange story. There was a gentleman a farmer, incidentally, which called Woodburn as his address, a fellow by the name of John Ramage. And he had been a very close friend of my father, who had been the chief clerk, what is now known as the Secretary of the Senate. My father died in 1937, and I returned to Woodburn from the University of Oregon to be of assistance to my mother. And after about 20 years, one day this gentleman, John Ramage, stopped into the office and said, "Winton, I think you should run for the legislature." The last thing that I was thinking about, because I had a small insurance business, property casualty business, and I didn't have any money to run for the legislature. Times were tough, and John made the comment that you're reluctant to run at all, but just say that you will run, and I'll put together the necessary support. I had a little visit with my office crew to see if this would be possible to do, and of course the argument was that, after all, you only live 18 miles from Salem. The legislature doesn't last very long. You can attend the sessions in the morning, and during the day when this formal session's on, then you can return home to Woodburn and continue your insurance business during the rest of the day. That sounded good. Never worked that way, but I finally acquiesced that I'd permit my name to be submitted for election. And so with a whole group of other people that were anxious to be in the legislature, my name appeared on the ballot. And with the work of a lot of people, incidentally, I can tell you that I only spent $100 of my own money total to be elected. I didn't know what primary issues there was when I was elected. It was just a case of being a vote up here in the legislature. But I suppose that as I remember it, the big thing was the budget, money, how to run the government, how much taxes are going to be levied. That was more important than anything else. The economy, yes, but we hadn't thought too much about, from the state level, of doing much for the economy. Actually, legislature, when I first came here, we'd sit in a committee meeting, and there would be maybe just two people listening to the committee discussing a bill as to the merits of the bill, as to whether it should be passed out to the legislative body or whether it should be maybe just laid on the table. Only two people. The general public was not interested in what the legislature was doing. As a net result, we had very few people that ever attended a committee meeting and actually knew what was going on. So I can't say what the big problems were. It was what was finally was brought to us by business interests, by the farmers. Nobody ever thought of Senate Bill 100, the one that we just had the difference of opinion on, and which number 37 was voted in recently, which changed the allocation of properties and one thing and another. That was not even thought of in 1957. Came up a little bit later, and of course then became a big item, but was not considered of much importance at the time. I really can't remember them all from memory. It seemed like they were a little bit different each session. After all the appointments were made by the speaker, and you didn't always get your wish. Everybody wished to be on Ways and Means. Very few wished to be on taxes. I was never on either of those committees, even whether I wished it or not. But they had committees like military affairs, and I happened to be on that committee because it didn't do anything. What military affairs does a state legislature have to work on? I was on some committees that dealt with social problems. I can't recall the names of the committee. I can remember that one lady that was always the chairman of that particular committee, Grace Peck, who was quite a figure in those days in the legislature, and that was her strong bit was the doing something for the poor people, doing something for the homeless, taking care of, for example, and was the moving figure in getting a women's prison instead of having women incarcerated in the main prison with men, by getting a separate prison for women. That was one of her big main ideas. I served on that committee. I really don't remember too much about the other committees. Too far back. I've been retired for 25 years. After all, there weren't too many women in prison, so they were not bad people. So after all, women didn't go to prison. So why do we have a separate prison? They could have a small area in the state prison at the end of State Street, which would be allocated to them, be kept segregated from the men, be no interrelationship socially or otherwise. So it was a hard sell. There's just not that many women criminals. We don't need to spend the money. So it was an issue. Coming from a little town of Woodburn, most of my clients were farmers, so I was very much interested in agriculture and what was happening to the farmers. Although there wasn't much, we had the agriculture department, financing that, having support for Oregon State University, which was a farm-related institution. My interests were just general. I was in business, and so I was interested in banking, interested in insurance, interested in those type of activities, and interested in what advantages there were for the young people. I had really no great special aims and ideas of changing the world. That was kind of interesting. In the 1964 election, I was defeated. At that time, in the 64 election, the Republican Party, of which had been the minority from 57 through to 65, the Republicans, having been the minority party during that period, didn't have much to say about what went on up here at the legislature and how it was run and who did what. Now, I, of course, through my father having been chief clerk of the Senate, it had been my opportunity when there was, and he saw to it that I got to be exposed to the legislature in the years when he was chief clerk. I had some background experience as to how the legislature was run. Following the election, and I was defeated, the Republicans took over as the majority party. The Monty Montgomery, who was designated to become the speaker by the Republicans, gave me a call on telephone at my office in Woodburn and said that they'd had a caucus meeting of the members who were elected to the House, and but nobody knew how to get the legislature started. And come in January, they had to have somebody do something to get the thing organized, and that I seemed to have the best qualifications. I told Monty, I said, you know, I was defeated. I've got an insurance business to run. I really don't have time to do anything like that. He was rather persuasive and said, well, you know, would you just go up and take a look here before the first of the year and see what it's going to take to get this thing all put together? And I said, yes, I would. Acquiesced to that. I came up here, take a look, see if there was any records. Every file was cleaned out. Every drawer was cleaned. Just, I mean, the previous people who were running the legislature did a good job of cleaning it out. It so happened that a number of the girls that had been working on committees had secured positions in the state government and were on permanent employment. I checked out as where those girls were all located and visited with them and had a little chit-chat with what they did and what their job was and how they handled it, and found out that they even had some of the forms that were used that they had taken home with them, collected them, and I got a sample of those, sat down and figured out exactly how the front desk ran, what the counter clerk did, what the assistant chief clerk did, what the reading clerk did, what the chief clerk did, what happened on the first day of the session, who said what, who dropped the gavel, who made what motions were made, when the rules were established and what the rules were. And I assembled that all in its proper form and made it ready, available, and they asked that I continue on and make sure that the opening session, that everything was had their script in hand so that they knew what to do. So I said, okay, I'll stay on and do that for you. Got them started, got the first day all through, the new speaker in, all the changes made, committees appointed, and people all seated. And I went to Montgomery and said, well, now I've got you here for the first day. And he said, well, will you stay on for another week? And I said, well, yes, I'll get you through the first week. And as an acting chief clerk. And a month went by, and I'm still doing the acting chief clerk's work. And I told Bonnie, I said, now look, the agreement was that you people would find a person and I would train them to be the chief clerk. And a month has gone by, and you haven't done anything about it. And he said, well, could you just stay on for just a little while longer? We'll make up our mind. Well, the net result of that was that I was the longest serving temporary chief clerk in the state of Oregon, because I lasted until 1982. I can't tell you much. He was first elected to the position of calendar clerk in the Senate back in 1907. In those days, and up until, quite recently, in fact, into the 50s, why the desk personnel, the sergeant at arms, assistant sergeant at arms, both in the House and the Senate, were elected by the members, actual election. Later, that was done away with, and the only officer that was elected was the chief clerk of the House and the secretary of the Senate. Well, my dad was elected as calendar clerk in 1907. He was a desk officer, and I think as from calendar clerk to assistant chief clerk, and then in 1922 was elected chief clerk of the Senate. He was in that position continuously until 1937, and he happened to die during the session of 1937, which caused a little bit of a problem for the legislature, temporarily at least. So that was basically his history, and about as much as I can tell, because I was only up here occasionally in the legislature, and I really didn't know, except that when a member introduced a bill, he actually handed the bill to the chief clerk, provided that by rule that that's what he would do, and so that's what I knew. That's what the chief clerk did. He received the bills for introduction and for first reading and processing. Oh, biggest challenge the chief clerk was always making sure that there was not some member out here that had read some rules someplace and was making an attempt to trip up the speaker. This is always a great trick that the minority party attempts to make as much problem for the majority party as possible on the floor of the legislative chambers as in the committee or any place else. I mean, this is a part of the game. And if you can trip the speaker up, well, that's great, because the speaker makes the decision as to whether the motion is in order, out of order, or whatever. the chief clerk was designated as the parliamentarian. So the chief clerk is always immediately at the elbow of the Speaker of the House to make sure that he makes the proper decision and is not embarrassed. Now, that's one of the biggest challenges for the chief clerk. It's the one that, if you're aware of what the chief clerk is doing, is that he's standing up there right close to where he can whisper or in a very low voice tell him, hey, this is not the way you go. Do it this other way, and this is the motion you make. The members of the House don't pay too much attention to the rules. Somebody has to be the person that actually makes the final decision. That's one of the things that the chief clerk does. And there's always somebody out there who's trying to shoot him down. It's quite a game. Other than that, just making sure that everything at the desk is done properly. Everybody is doing their work properly. And also, he is the person, incidentally, or she, is the person who finally signs off on the proceedings of his respective chamber, signs off with the Speaker and the President of the Senate, the official business of the chamber which he's the chief clerk of. To do that, he has to be able to look at the records and make sure that every motion has been made correctly, that it is constitutional, that the record as it goes into the files could stand up with very close scrutiny by the Supreme Court if it was necessary in a court proceedings for the Supreme Court to determine whether or not the actual procedure that created that law was constitutionally done. That is probably the biggest job that the chief clerk's got. I've thought about that a lot since I've received a letter from Debbie. I suppose that personally, there was two people that I, in all my experience in relation to my relationship with the legislature, state government, was probably a fellow from Klamath Falls, Harry Boyven. Harry Boyven came to the legislature back in about 1937, maybe 35, I can't remember exactly. He was an attorney in Klamath Falls. He was elected as the Speaker of the House. In fact, the House had a terrible time back in the 30s. This was during the Roosevelt days, of course. They could not come to an agreement, and young Boyven from Klamath Falls, they finally settled on him. He was a freshman, and they made him the Speaker because the rest of them couldn't get along, so they went and selected this young fellow. Harry Boyven served in the legislature, was in until maybe 1969. He was here continuously. He came to be known as the Fox. But Harry Boyven had the rare capacity to be able to get people to compromise. He was president of the Senate at one time, but I always admired Harry because he was a Democrat. I was a Republican, but I always thought that he was one of the best that I had ever had the chance to be around, who could compromise and could get other people to come to compromise. Another person that I had a great deal of admiration for was Harry Belton from Canby. Was a senator, a Republican, a very fine person, very honest, qualities, very best. I always admired Belton. He finally became, I think he was state treasurer finally, as I recall. Ran for governor, never was successful. Those two people stand out in my mind as the two people that I remember the most. A lot of very outstanding people in state government, but I don't give them too much credit. Oh, I can remember when the final day of one session, the Speaker of the House fell off the rostrum because he had too much whiskey. I can remember another occasion when they had to call the House, and one of the representatives had imbibed a little too much. His name was called. He managed to get his foot into his wastebasket and fell over. Created quite a to-do. It was right in here someplace too, not too far away, as I recall. Little instances like that. Probably the only occasion that you will find it, it's in the official journals of the House of Representatives, and it was on the opening day of the 1965 session. My name came up for election as chief clerk, and this one representative, a lady, explained her vote of no, and said that Mr. Hunt is personally, what was her exact? I was personally repugnant. That was it to her. And that's written right into the procedures of the House. You'll find it in print if you look at that particular 1965 session. And that was the cause. In 1963, when I was a member of the House, I'd been a little bit obstreperous as to her conduct, and called her into up a little bit short, and in fact, she went and broke down and cried. I felt badly about that, but she got even the next session. They've gone downhill in a big way. You know, people who came to the legislature, they might have had some kind of a program to put across, but by and large, as I remember, certainly in my case, I came to the legislature was in fact, I went and broke down and cried when I came to the legislature the first time as a representative, to think that I would be one of a group of 90 people that were going to pass laws or create conditions that would affect other people, and that it was a great honor just to be a member of the legislature, just as it would be a great honor to be a governor, a great honor to be Secretary of State, a great honor to be a state treasurer. You're elected by the people with just the honor of being able to serve them. Nowadays, it seems that everybody that comes to the legislature, at least, has some kind of a program. The words don't come easy, but I have talked to a number of lobbyists who have told me that they can no longer trust the legislature. They talk to individuals and ask them if they will give them their vote, either yes or no, whichever way it might be, for a certain piece of legislation that lobbyist is interested in. The member will say, yes, oh yeah, I'll vote for you, no question about it. And then the measure comes up on the floor of the House, and the person votes exactly the opposite direction. I've had lobbyists tell me that they just cannot trust the members of the legislature. They do not keep their word. I do not spend any time up here anymore. I have not been in this building now for probably 10 years. I don't know anybody that's in the legislature anymore. But just in talking to friends and acquaintances that have been up here, that they feel that the honesty and stability of the legislature is not what it used to be. That's a good question and a tough one to answer, because I think we have some kind of this is true nationally, and particularly just in recent weeks and months, the situation with the Congress of the United States. Where are the morals? Where are the obvious honesty has disappeared? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. Whether it's degeneration of society generally, I'm not sure. But I know that there is a problem. And the problem is in our government, and I think it's bad. I'm very sorry to see it happen. If the people who are running your governmental affairs cannot be trusted, then I think civilization is showing a tendency to degrade. But I have no answer as to how to correct it. We had good people, and we had people who were not so good in government in the years past. We've had some real scandals, governmental scandals back in the 1860s and 70s when they sold off state property to speculators. It's I don't think that been an awful lot of difference. We had we had people like Boss Tweed back in New York in the early days that was as crooked as possibly could be. We've had the city bosses, the Pendergrass and other people back in the early part of this of the 20th century. But it seems to be more pervasive now than it was in those days. Maybe it's maybe we get too much information from too many sources. With TV the computers. It used to be, you know, you got all your information from the newspaper pretty much. Now, but you get it from all sources. It's coming at you from every direction, and not always accurate, and not always just straight news. Everybody editorializes these days. Everybody has their own opinion. The news, just the plain news reporter has got an opinion, and it's cited, and you see it in their articles all the time. So I don't know. Sometimes I think we're just getting too much information. Whatever happens in New York, just happened an hour ago, we'll know all about it. If it was in the early days, you wouldn't hear about that until 2 or 3 weeks after it was done, and so what? It was ancient news then. You know, you can say a person is no good so-and-so, and you make that to a group like the Rotary or the Kiwanis or the Lions or the Old Ladies Tea Club, and that'll be on the TV or the radio in the next hour. So you have it immediately. So the person that you've mentioned or said about, well, they can't say that about me, and right away you have a response. When you don't have so much immediate news, you're not going to react so fast. You're going to sit back and think about it. If you heard it, maybe it was something that the fellow said 2 weeks ago about you. Well, he's entitled to his opinion, and I'm entitled to mine. And that was 2 weeks ago, and so you don't get upset about it. People have a tendency to react too quickly now to what they're hearing. Well, yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting. You got to think a little bit about what back in the 1950s, which is not so long ago, it's just 50 years ago. The way we campaigned in those days, you had business cards, just like a business card that a person uses today to announce his business as it was. You have the little cards made up, about 3 inches by an inch and a half. Put your name on it. Maybe you get your picture on it. And the fact that you were a good guy and running for the legislature and like to have their vote, and you'd stand on the street corner and pass those out to people. You know, you'd say, gee, that's kind of a strange thing to do. Well, that was the way you, that's the way you electioneered in those days. You handed everybody your card. You know, here's my card. I'm running for the legislature. I'd like to have your vote. I'm Mr. Hunt. This is my picture here on the card. And you got buy those. You get those printed by the thousands, and stand in the corner, down the street. I'd come into Salem, stand down the corner in the street, hand my card out like that. That's where all my money went, was in the calling cards, if you call them that sort of thing, business cards. And occasionally you get a little sign made about, maybe about 8.5 by 11 with your picture on it, where you can post it up here and there, or get somebody to put it in their window. They liked you real well, and they wanted to be a part of your campaign, so you have a little picture for them and vote for so-and-so. That was it. No TV, no radio. Didn't bother. Well, that was foolish to be electioneering over the radio. People would listen to that at night for Jack Benny or something else, but not for voting. So Today, you do it a little bit differently. So I didn't have to spend much money. We're more remote now. If we meet with people, we like to meet with them in a crowd where we can stand up and expound our thoughts and our ideas and our beliefs and so on. Of course, people, when you were just down on the street corner passing out a card, most people were in a hurry going someplace else, and they didn't particularly want to talk to you anyhow. But the fact that you were standing there, and they could probably, when they walked past it, they had some kind of an idea and the card in the hand, why they had, when it came to election time, I said, oh, I remember that guy standing on the corner. Yeah, he's, I'll vote for him. Or I went and talked to so-and-so that talked to the guy that voted, had the card on the corner. But now you're trying to get a bigger group of people all the time. So you can do it through TV, you can do it through, there isn't much, I don't know. I don't listen to the radio anymore, so I don't know how much goes on that. Well, of course, one is Senate Bill 100, which was that allocation of property situation. Was probably one big thing. One thing that I was involved with, and that was a committee that was created back in '67 that took and examined the legislature, examined its good points and its bad points. And I'm going to show you this. It ended up being this. This was the report. Now, much of what the legislature has been operating has been underneath this report since it came out. The changes have been made. Now we've got a new one appointed. They're going to reinvent the wheel. We kind of reinvented the wheel, but we streamlined it. And it's all in this little deal here. We went and made out several thousand copies of this, distributed them widely, nationally. In fact, it became quite an item nationally. There's supposed to be plenty of copies in the archives. But I've understood that the archives have decided there was a lot of this old stuff they didn't need anymore, so they threw it out. Every member of the legislature got one of these, but this business of reports by interim committees are handed to the new legislature when it comes in, and nobody ever reads them, particularly the legislators. They're too busy doing something else. So, but much of what I thought of was involved in this. I was the executive director for the committee. I was not on the committee, I was the director of the committee. I went and planned their agenda. I planned what they talked about. I planned what the different points that should be brought up, what the different problems were in other legislatures, brought it to their attention. In fact, I wrote this whole manual, as it were. I felt that this was one of my biggest contributions that I made to the state of Oregon and to the legislature. I don't know what's ever happened to it, but I have one copy, and that's it. Bills were drafted and everything else, and they're a part of this report. And some of them they did not endorse, which is, well, the way it should be, but much of it did. Such as building the wings. That was an item of considerable contention in the legislature. Should the legislature appropriate money to improve their office quarters? You see, at one time, the desk was it. This was it. This was your office, was this desk. And this is where you kept your papers. There was no files, no file cabinets. There was nothing. And the legislature fought with that and fought with that. And it was, they had a terrible time of coming to the grips with the fact that they should spend the money to improve the Capitol building. This put it across. And as a net result, the wings that we now have on each end of the building were as a result of this committee insisting that it be done. That is about it. It's hard to think that this legislature existed with 3 phones in that area and 3 phones in that area. And that was the only phone that for 60 people, there was no phones out in the lobby area, nothing like that. 6 phones for 60 people to conduct business. No offices, no file cabinets. Your secretary sat right next to you. You didn't even have a microphone. Microphone was I had a microphone about every 8 desks, something like that. So the fact that we even got a microphone on everybody's desk, that was a big deal. The fact we got a voting system in was another big deal, and I had much to do with that. Actually, Dick Hyman, Speaker of the House in the 73 session, he and I got together on this situation. He thought that we should have a system, electronic system, and he took it up with his caucus, and he got his caucus to go along with the idea that we should try and get it done. He came to me and he asked me to work out the program, get it in writing so that we could sell the idea, which I did. Figured out how many minutes it took on a roll call, oral roll call, how long it took then to check that roll call out and make it valid on the front desk. And that did that so many times a day, and it did that so many times during a session. So that was so many hours that the session could have been productive instead of. So we just had to have this system. That's all there was to it. So that we sold it. Sold it to the members on that basis, and then we put it together. It was not controversial in the House, but it was in the Senate. Senate doesn't, I don't know what the Senate has, whether they ever went for it or not, but they felt that they were the patricians of legislation, and they didn't really need anything like that. You know, it's fine, that's what's, but as far as the House is concerned, there never was any real, the only real contention was, can we afford it? It's always been, can we afford it? Can we afford it? You know, Oregon lives on a Cadillac budget with a Ford income. I just say, look, be honest, be fair, do the best that you can, and be true to yourself. Well, I worked with the committee on that. That was a difficult thing. There was, that really got started by a fellow who had done much traveling. He was locally here in Salem. I'm trying to remember his name right. I can't recall it right offhand. But he agitated enough to bring it to the interest of some people in the legislature. Paul Hanneman, from over on the coast, was really the motivator, I think, at the legislative level. The industry, glass industry, bottle industry, the beer manufacturers, the brewers, the soft drink people were all opposed to it. They, without any deviation, they were all opposed. The people in the union, the glass union, people who were in the unions making glass bottles were for it. They appeared before the committee for that measure. It was touch and go for a while, but we finally the industry broke down and realized that this bill was going to be brought before the legislature, before the people. Nothing much that they could do about it. They could spend a lot of money, but they're not going to avoid it being brought up for contest. I tell you, the fact that there's a tab on the top of cans now happened because that was insisted upon by the committee that was promoting the bill, that they had to have the tabs on the top, but they didn't throw them away. They had to stay fastened to the can because Paul Hanneman from over at the coast remarked about how his children walking on the beaches were getting their feet cut with these little tabs that came off the cans. So they had to make the tab to stay fastened to the can. That was one of the results from that committee, that tab that stays with the can is not thrown down. And that came about because Paul Hanneman's kids had cut feet walking on the beach. Since we didn't have offices, we had to have a place to put our hats and coats. Speaker's office was just over there, and not on the corner, but right next to the corner. There was always that space in the corner, and then the Speaker's office. They had toilet facilities back there, and then there was a large room where they had lockers in which you hung your hat and coat, an umbrella, and whatever. The lobbyists would, whenever they found out that, that maybe a spot of whiskey was your desire, why they'd always drop a bottle in your locker, if they find out, which is your locker, Winton, it was number so-and-so, okay. And you'd happen to notice the next time you went back that there was a bottle of whiskey there in your locker. That was the method. And of course, the House Lounge was up on the top floor. The elevator only went to the third floor. The back elevator only went to the third floor, from the basement to the third floor. Then you had to walk up the stairs to the fourth floor. So the reason you couldn't get that elevator up to the fourth floor is because the architect did not want any head houses on top of this building. He wanted the. I talked to him about that, why he had done that. Would upset the contour of his building. So they stopped the elevators at the 3rd floor and put the head house then on the 4th floor. Eventually, the legislature decided that we had to have the elevator go to the 4th floor. But the house lounge was up on the top floor, but you didn't have any lunches. The legislature decided that they would hire 2 attendants who would be called house attendants. And there was bathrooms or toilet area up on the 4th floor, so they went and used that as kind of a kitchen, and they would make coffee in the toilet area, and they make sandwiches, and that's how we had our food. They'd make cold cut sandwiches and coffee made in the toilet, served to us out there in the house lounge area. Now, all that had hard seats. In fact, I still have one of the chairs at home. They went and sold them off finally, but they were just hard chairs to sit in, and tables, but long tables. I mean, it was just like a dormitory. Hell of a shape, but that was the way it was supposed to be. I mean, you're supposed to come here and do your business and get the hell back home. See, the legislature legislator got $3 a day for 40 days. That was it originally. When 40 days is up, they stopped the clock. But they kept on legislating. The only people that got paid were the staff. The legislators didn't get any more pay. So $3 a day for 40 days is $120 you got to be up here. So legislatures didn't stay in session too long after 40 days. Well, that got so that it slopped over. It got longer and longer and longer. It got up like maybe 60 days or something like that. And finally, they got a little change in the Constitution that the legislators would get $600 a year pay. Now, when I came in 1957, that was my pay, $600. Now, you didn't get paid. Now, you served for two years. That was your term. But you didn't get paid $1,200. You got paid $600 in the first year, and then second year, you're not in session, but you got another $600. And then finally, it was changed around the way it is now, and so they get per diem, and they get monthly pay and this sort of thing. But for example, back in the 30s, chief clerk got $8 a day. The sergeant at arms got $6 a day. Common clerk got $3 a day. That was specified in the rules. Generally speaking, people in Oregon were not much interested in paying anybody very much money to be in government. I'm totally opposed to it, have been all the time. I don't think it's necessary. In fact, this group here took that subject up and hashed it and rehashed it and chewed it and spit it out and chewed it again. Their final decision that the state of Oregon didn't need to have a session every year. It didn't need a professional legislature. That it was, their structure was such that, what with an emergency board and everything, they could take care of emergencies pretty well. And there was no need for the legislature to sit like one in California. I feel that a business of this state, 3 million odd people, population-wise, it would be a useless expenditure. What's going to happen is if you have annual sessions, you're going to have what's going on in California with members of the legislature or the assembly, as they call themselves down there, running around with credit cards paid for by the state. Automobiles paid for by the state. I mean, it's a real lush program. Washington is not quite that good, but they have a limited session in a second year, and I think it's restricted to just monetary affairs, ways and means, budget, and that's it. But I just don't think that Oregon's there yet. If Oregon gets another couple of million people, then it might be necessary. But now I don't see it. No, I'm opposed to term limits. You got term limits taken care of by elections. You have elections every 2 years. That's term limits. If you don't like the guy, don't vote for him. If you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. Look at what's happening on the national level now. It looks like we're going to have a big turnover in the November election. That the House and the Senate will go to the other party, will not be Republican. I went and read like one columnist the other day. He said he would like to see the Democrats take the House, National House of Congress by one vote and the Senate by one vote. That would give them the power to run, but with one vote, it doesn't give them much leverage. Now, this columnist is, I read him a lot. He's got his head screwed on right, and I had to kind of agree with him. But I can't see term limits are no good. Term limits gives the third house too much leverage. For example, you will find that the House of Representatives loses about 1/3 of itself each election. Now, House of Representatives every 2 years, senators are every 4 years. The Senate will not change that much, but the House almost invariably and historically, there will be 20 people that will not be back. Very, very few people last for a very long time. There was a senator, Democrat, came from Baker County by the name of Strayer, Senator Strayer. He was, for several sessions, was the only Democrat in the Senate. But he was continuously elected. I think he was elected for about 30 years to the Senate. And was for several years was the only Democrat that was there, but he came back. But you call that longevity? How much power did he have? I think he had a lot of influence. Even though he was only one vote, everybody respected his integrity and his intelligence and his experience. Now, you take the House of Representatives. There's a fellow by the name of Henry Seaman, came from Klamath Falls. Henry was a Democrat. And that was at a time when most of the House was Republican. But the House of Representatives, the Republicans, made Henry Seaman the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the most powerful committee in the House, in the legislature. They made him chairman. And they did it, and he ran it as chairman. Now, I'm telling you, he was not a rubber stamp chairman. I knew Harry, or Henry, a wonderful man. And the reason that he had that position is because of what the rest of the body thought about him as an individual. In both those cases, Strayer and Seaman, integrity, honesty, their ability, put them what I consider to be at the top of their deal. I got to tell you one other little story. Up at the front, back of the second row, I can't remember, it made me think about it, was thinking of Klamath Falls. In the 1956 election, which was a big turnover, and the Democrats took over the House of Representatives and split 50-50 with the Senate. A young fellow from Klamath Falls who was, I think he was a bag boy for Safeway, but he was elected to the House. I can't recall his name. He was just a young fellow. And he came up here. He was as green as any grass as ever was. And I didn't know about this until later years, and it was told to me by the lobbyists. But this young fellow came up from Klamath Falls. The unions really sent him up here. And the night man, cleanup man in here, finally went and told one of the lobbyists about this young fellow that's sleeping on the floor of this house. And they checked it out, and this was this young fellow from Klamath Falls. He didn't have any money. He came up here, and he had no place to stay. He was eating the sandwiches out of the lounge. And he was sleeping underneath of his desk here on the floor of the house. The lobbyists went and took up a little collection and went and got a room for him at the YMCA. And that's where he lived, the YMCA, through the beneficence of the Third House. I could give you the guy's name. I'd have to take a look at the record to see who it was, but he didn't come back, of course. He was out here for another session. He just plain couldn't afford it. He was just an enthusiastic young guy, I guess, that the labor unions down there in Klamath Falls were flexing their muscle and hadn't had a chance to flex it for a long time. And I'm going to tell you one thing about the legislature. You're never going to get rich. And I know of people who have gone broke being in the legislature. I've known of attorneys who lost their practice by being in the legislature. I have known of divorces because of the legislature. And I mean people in the legislature. I can tell people this, that when you are sitting as a legislator in sessions, you are very important. People will kowtow to you. People will look for even a smile from you. And then comes sine die. And sine die, you go back home. And all of a sudden, you're just an ordinary citizen. Nobody pays any attention to you anymore except your next door neighbor. Nobody takes you out to dinner. Nobody entertains you. Nobody really asks for your advice. Because all of a sudden you're no longer news media fodder. You are no longer quoted. You no longer are mentioned on the TV. You are nothing more than what you were before you went to the legislature. And that period in the legislature when you thought you were essential, absolutely necessary, that they couldn't do without you, all of a sudden you find that they don't need you at all. I personally had an interesting little experience. After all, I'd gone through this business of entertainment and being entertained and enjoying this and that and the other. And then I became chief clerk. Oh, gee, I had all these friends, all these people that I associated with when I was in the legislature. They would call me on the phone and this sort of thing. And even during the interim, I arranged maybe a pheasant hunt or something of that kind. And after I became chief clerk, God, I wasn't going out to lunch anymore. I wasn't being entertained. And this one fellow is one of the lobbyists, a real good friend. I said, you know, Bill, I don't see you guys anymore. How come I never get to go to lunch? He says, Winton, you don't have a vote anymore. I tell you, I got right down off of my pedestal right away, quick. I found out what it was all about, just that fast, bingo. Because I had moved from being a legislator into being a chief clerk, and that wasn't much of a move as far as I was concerned. After all, Montgomery says, you run the House of Representatives, and I was running it, so God, I had to be important. But that one thing, I didn't have any vote. So life is like that.